No peace with Israel, no negotiations with Israel, no recognition of Israel. This was the declaration loudly proclaimed from Khartoum on the 1st of September 1967, where all the Arab leaders had gathered for a summit conference in the aftermath of the humiliating defeat in the Six-Day War. The Arab leaders also declared at Khartoum that no compromise will be done over the rights of Palestinians. King Faisal and Jamal Abdel Nasser resolved their differences and agreed to wind up the war in Yemen. Faisal also magnanimously told Nasser that he would pay the whole bill required to buy the heavy weapons lost in the war by Egypt. I am Dr. Hassan Bukhari, and this is the 18th episode of our series Palestine versus Israel. On the surface, the Arabs were defiant in the face of defeat. The Khartoum Declaration announced their resolve to keep fighting Israel until Palestine was freed. But beneath this bluster lurked other motives. The Six-Day War had altered the situation immensely. Now most of the Arab states were more concerned with getting their own territories back from Israel than with regaining Palestine's freedom. Charles Smith writes about the Egyptian policy during this period. They, the Egyptians, recognized the need to give Israel de facto, though not de jure, recognition through negotiations conducted by third parties, specifically the United Nations, if Israel would return to its pre-war frontiers. They could discard the Palestinians at the proper moment. Israel, though, refused to play ball. Israel wanted direct negotiations without any third-party mediator and complete recognition from the Arabs. In exchange, it was ready to negotiate for the Golan Heights and Sinai, but it had no intention of returning the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. 5 months after the war, on the 22nd of November 1967, the UN Security Council issued Resolution 242. Resolution 242 has 4 important points. Number 1, it stressed the inadmissibility of the acquisition of territory by war. Number 2, it called for withdrawal of Israel from territories occupied in the recent conflict. Number 3, it called for termination of all claims or states of belligerency and respect for and acknowledgement of the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and political independence of every state in the area and their right to live in peace within secure and recognized boundaries free from threats and acts of force. Number 4, a clause referred to a just settlement of the Palestinian refugee problem. Number 5, the recommendation of the appointment of a special UN representative to initiate negotiations based on the principles espoused in the document. Swedish diplomat Gunnar Jarring was appointed the special UN representative. Jarring undertook shuttle diplomacy and made a lot of separate visits to the Arab and Israeli capitals, but ultimately his efforts bore little fruit. Resolution 242 effectively forgot all the UN promises and recommendations for the Middle East problem made before the Six-Day War. Rashid Khalidi has elucidated this point quite well in his book The 100 Years' War on Palestine. Resolution 242 effectively legitimated the 1949 Armistice Lines, since known as the 1967 borders or the Green Line, as Israel's de facto boundaries, thereby indirectly consenting to its conquest of most of Palestine in the 1948 war. The failure to refer to core issues dating back to 1948 extended to ignoring the right of the Palestinian refugees to return to their homes and obtain compensation, another blow to their aspirations. With Resolution 242, the UN was walking away from its own commitment to these rights, consecrated by the General Assembly in Resolution 194 in December 1948. Once again, The Palestinians were being dealt with by the great powers in a cavalier fashion, their rights ignored, deemed not worthy of mention by name in the key international decision meant to resolve the conflict and determine their fate. But Resolution 242 did give hope to some sections in Egypt and Jordan that they might get their lands lost to Israel in the Six-Day War back. The Israelis, though, stood firm and refused to cede back any territory without full recognition and direct negotiations. Even then, they were only willing to part from only a portion of recently occupied territories. This Israeli stance forced Egypt's Jamal Abdel Nasser to conclude that Egypt could only gain its lost lands through a successful war. By 1968, Egypt's military had largely recovered from the material losses suffered during the Six-Day War. Massive Saudi and Soviet aid enabled Jamal Abdel Nasser to think about reigniting armed conflict with Israel. The Soviet Union, in particular, was supportive of such an approach as it wanted to retrieve its influence in the Middle East after the setback suffered in the Six-Day War. Armed with new Soviet weapons, Nasser decided to increase military pressure alongside the Suez Canal in end 1968. Israel, in turn, was also receiving huge US civil and military aid despite its intransigence regarding UN resolutions. The Israeli ability to dig deep inside USA's deep pockets quenched any thirst for peace, if there was any in the first place. Israel responded to Egyptian pressure on the Suez Canal border by constructing a line of fortifications all along the canal. This line was named the Bar-Lev Line after the Israeli Chief of General Staff, General Chaim Bar-Lev. On the 8th of March 1969, another war erupted between Israel and Egypt. Dubbed the War of Attrition, this war was going to be different from the more conventional past Arab-Israeli wars. The underlying concept in Jamal Abdel Nasser's mind was that Egypt should leverage its vast population to engage Israel in a bleeding contest. Unlike the pre-1967 war border, the Suez Canal was a formidable obstacle, and Nasser knew that Israelis wouldn't be able to launch a surprise attack with huge mobile forces across this water obstacle with ease. Occupying the Sinai had also lengthened Israeli supply lines while shortening those of Egypt. Nasser wanted to hit Israelis across the canal with heavy Soviet-supplied artillery, and he was confident that Soviet-supplied surface-to-air missile SAM batteries would be able to defend Egypt from the Israeli Air Force. He was prepared to accept vast casualties, but thought that even moderate casualties would lead Israel to think about getting out of this contest because of the much smaller size of the Israeli population. Thus, on the 8th of March 1969, Egypt launched the War of Attrition with a massive artillery bombardment of the Bar-Lev Line. Egyptian military objectives in this war were to destroy the Bar-Lev Line fortifications, to prevent the Israelis from reconstructing fortifications after they were destroyed, to make life intolerable for Israeli forces on the east bank of the canal, to inspire offensive spirit in Egyptian troops, and to carry out practiced canal crossing operations. Nasser thought that after the achievement of these objectives, he would be in a position to launch a massive offensive across the canal and at least recapture the area up to the Mitla and Gidi passes, thus regaining full control of the Suez Canal again. Egypt suffered a significant setback on the second day of the war when its Chief of General Staff, General Abdul Munim Riyad, was killed in action on the front by an Israeli artillery shell. Riyad was a very competent officer who was also very popular in the military. General Ahmad Ismail Ali replaced him. Initially, the Egyptian artillery inflicted significant casualties on the Israelis, but Israel was plentifully supplied with F-4 Phantom jets by the US, which was arguably the best combat aircraft of that era. From July 1969 onwards, the Israelis started their own counteroffensive in which most of the Egyptian anti-aircraft outfits were destroyed. Egyptian artillery also took much damage and its effectiveness reduced a lot as well. Buoyed by success, Israel started mounting deep penetration air raids into Egypt in January 1970. Israeli aircraft deliberately target civilians in order to increase the cost of the conflict for Egypt and dent Nasser's popularity at home. Some Israeli raids were purely callous and indicative of a sadistic and bullying mentality. For instance, in early 1970, Israeli aircraft hit a primary school at Bahr al-Bakr, killing and wounding 50 children. This facet of Israeli character has endured, and even in 2024, Israeli air raids on Gaza have resulted in the killings of thousands of children. Nasser was dismayed by the military situation, but he wasn't ready to give in yet. In desperation, he turned to his Soviet allies and made an unusual request. He requested the Soviets to take over the air defense of Egypt. After some hesitation, the Soviets agreed and supplied Egypt with SA-3 SAMs and MiG-21J aircraft. They also sent many military personnel to operate the new SAMs. Soviet pilots were also sent to fly the new MiG-21s and patrol the airspace in Egypt's interior. According to Howard Saka, within 6 months, the Russians had between 10,000 and 14,000 of their own instructors and advisors in Egypt, as well as an impressive naval flotilla of 60 vessels off the Egyptian coast, an armada that matched the United States 6th Fleet in tonnage and surface firepower. The Egyptian Soviet defense system was further thickened with the introduction of SAM-4 and SAM-6 missiles. Soviet help turned the tide of the war, and once again the Israelis were forced on the back foot. In July 1970 alone, 20 Israeli aircraft, including many formidable Phantoms, were downed. Soviet piloted planes now started to patrol right up to the Suez Canal. The Israeli leadership now gave the permission to its air force to engage the Soviet aircraft as well. On the 30th of July, 4 Soviet aircraft were glued in an ambush and then destroyed by Israeli Phantoms. This incident sparked Soviet anger and the danger of a larger conflict between the superpowers' crew. Sensing this, all the sides exhibited willingness to step back from the brink. A ceasefire facilitated by US Secretary of State William Rogers came into effect on the 8th of August 1970 and the war of attrition ended. Israel agreed to the ceasefire with the satisfaction that Egypt had failed to achieve any of its military objectives. Israeli hold on the east bank of the Suez Canal was secure, and the only thing it feared was more direct Soviet involvement. The ceasefire offered a good opportunity to avoid a clash with the Soviets. Regarding Nasser's motives behind the acceptance of the ceasefire, Trevor Dupay writes, Nasser, who had no illusions that this ceasefire was a preliminary to peace, had come to the conclusion that by continuing the war of attrition, we are bleeding ourselves to death as long as the Israelis had complete air superiority. In the lull provided by the ceasefire, he was determined to build up an effective missile air defense, and once this was accomplished, he planned to send his army across the canal to strike for the Sinai passes. In late August or early September of 1970, he ordered his Defense Minister General Fauzi to initiate plans for such an operation. But there was one party to the conflict in the Middle East that was much dismayed by the ceasefire and considered it a betrayal of sorts: the Palestinians. Their resentment and feeling of abandonment resulted in an outburst of activity in Jordan, where they believed that King Hussein could be dethroned and replaced by a Palestinian government. This, in turn, led to the tragic events of the so-called Black September a few weeks after the ceasefire on the Egyptian front. The development of armed Palestinian liberation movements needs to be examined before the events of Black September can be properly understood. Egypt had created the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, in 1964 primarily to co-opt and control the rising tide of Palestinian nationalist fervor. But the shattering defeat of 1967 gave rise to new on-ground realities. According to Rashid Khalidi, in the immediate wake of the 1967 war, the militant Palestinian resistance groups took over the PLO, sidelining its Egypt-oriented leadership. Arafat, as the head of Fatah, the largest of these groups, soon became the chairman of the PLO Executive Committee, a post he retained, among others, until his death in 2004. Interestingly, the Palestinian militant organizations couldn't make much headway in areas of Palestine proper, such as the West Bank, because the local elite was bribed handsomely by Israelis and it cooperated effectively with the occupiers to handicap the insurgents. According to Howard Sacker, the mayors in the West Bank wanted no part of the guerrillas, and the Israelis sensed this. By using a give-and-take approach towards the local mayors and village mukhtars, therefore, the Israeli occupation regime kept track of incipient unrest. But the Palestinians found fertile soil in Jordan, where most of the population was Palestinian as well. Arafat started using Jordan as a launch pad for his raids into the West Bank. King Hussein, mauled by Israel in the Six-Day War, was forced to tolerate the Palestinians in the absence of a deal with Israel. Thus, the Palestinians and Jordanians developed an uneasy modus vivendi. Israel, though, was in no mood to tolerate Palestinian raids. It responded in typical heavy-handed fashion and launched a vicious sudden assault on the Fatah camp located in the Jordanian village of Karama on the 21st of March 1968. 15,000 soldiers with dozens of tanks and massive air support participated in the attack. The Israelis wanted to kill Arafat, destroy the camp, and occupy a bridgehead east of the Jordan River to deter future raids. To everyone's astonishment, the attack failed, and Israel arguably faced a defeat in the Battle of Keramah. Fatah insurgents and the Jordanians turned back the invaders with heavy losses on both sides. More than 200 Israeli soldiers and 24 tanks became casualties. Fatah and the Jordanians suffered about 500 casualties but managed to hold their ground and captured 4 Israeli tanks as well. Yasser Arafat was at Karama, but he escaped on a motorcycle just before the Israeli paratroopers isolated the town. Trevor Dupai wrote about the Battle of Karama. The Jordanians claim that during the battle they captured a staff officer's map showing clearly that then Israelis planned to occupy the right bank of the Jordan River between the Damia and the King Abdullah bridges and to extend a bridgehead into the hills to the east. The primary Israeli objective was unquestionably to punish the Fedayeen in and around Karama. But in the light of the size of the attacking force and its deployment, they may well have planned temporary occupation of a bridgehead east of the river. He further mentions, there is little doubt that the Israelis ran into much more effective opposition than they had expected and suffered much heavier casualties than anticipated. For this reason, there was considerable popular criticism of the raid in Israel. Interestingly, it was Fatah that reaped most of the glory from the Battle of Karama, even though the Jordanians had played a much more important role in battle. According to Rashid Khalidi, although it was Jordanian artillery and armor positioned in the hills overlooking the Jordan River Valley, which undoubtedly inflicted the most damage on Israel's forces, the Palestinians fighting inside Karama reaped most of the glory from this episode. The Battle of Karama proved to be a godsend to the propaganda of the Palestinian resistance movement, which effectively publicized the clash as a stand for Arab dignity, trampled underfoot as it had been by the failures of the Arab regimes. As a result, the Palestinian resistance was lionized throughout the Arab world. The Fatah-Jordan rivalry increased manifold after the Battle of Karama. Mounting tensions led to an exchange of fire between PLO guerrillas and Jordan army troops in November 1968. From there on, the tensions and violence only increased. According to Dupai, between November 1968 and July 1970, there were frequent incidents, as many precipitated by the guerrillas as by the Jordan army. 7 different times, Hussein and the PLO leaders, usually Arafat, arranged a ceasefire and signed solemn agreements to work together in peace and harmony against the common foe. In the next episode of Palestine vs. Israel, we will discuss the Black September incidents and the expulsion of Palestinian resistance from Jordan. Stay tuned, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel.